Hello and welcome. It's 10:30. It is the 29th day of August 2021. I'm your grumpy guide to all things gaming, the OGGM, and we're grinding up to the very last days of RPG a Day 2021. Every day for the month of August, we have had this wonderful list given to us by the people at autocratic.com and posted on Facebook, where we've had these prompts, and every day we've tried to respond to the prompts. Some of them have been better than others, some of them have been good, some of them have got bad reviews. In the end, it's a great experiment, and I hope we can continue to do it long into the future. It's the 29th day, and today's word is system. System. Thus, this picture of many role-playing game systems, possibly taken from some shelf at some role-playing store. That's Cess Games and Anime here in Ventura. So I guess the question is, do I have a favorite system, or do I think there's a system that is best? Because we know there's worst systems. I mean, there's definitely plenty of games people say is the worst game, and there's several games that some people say is the worst role-playing system, and other people are like, no, that's bad. It's generally agreed that the core three bad ones, Fatal. But then I've heard that there are people who say that the Fatal system is good. If you just take all the weird crap out of Fatal and the inappropriate stuff and just look at the actual math of the system, it's actually a decent system. Just a horrible game. So, is there a worst game? Is there a best game? Is there a game that you can do anything with? A lot of people say the basic system for Call of Cthulhu is a great game that you could run anything in, and there has been plenty of examples of how people have used that game to just impromptu things. I've read through it, and I can see the appeal. I also think it's sort of unnecessarily complicated in some ways for someone like me. I know other people love it, and I can see how you could use it to emulate any game with some work, but I think there are other systems that do the same thing better. So I guess that means I don't know if it's the best. I often refer to Savage Worlds as one of the best systems for applying things to. And that I will say, every time I've played Savage Worlds, run Savage Worlds, there's no idea that I've had that I couldn't make work in Savage Worlds. Was there something to say? Especially when I was running superheroes and playing superheroes with Savage Worlds. We would come up with some really weird concepts to see if we could actually make them work in Savage Worlds. And we did. So, yeah. But Savage Worlds has a very specific tone and flavor, and I definitely think there's some games that wouldn't work with Savage Worlds. Same with Powered by the Apocalypse. Take it, for example, Dungeon World, the D&D emulator that uses Powered by the Apocalypse. Do I think that Dungeon World does D&D well? No, I do not. Do I think Powered by the Apocalypse could do fantasy well? Certain types of fantasy, yes. But there's also certain types of fantasy I don't. What about Gurps? I mean, there's a system I helped, play tested and write. Do I think there's every system that can work with Gurps? And there's a lot of games, genres that do work with Gurps, but there's plenty that don't. So again, maybe Gurps is not the best system. What about D20? Well, let me just throw this out there before we get into that ugly pot. I liked 4th edition D&D, and I'm not afraid to say it. There was a lot of stuff in it I liked. I enjoyed playing it. I thought it was easy. I liked the mechanics. I liked the movement idea. I liked the skill creep. Just the politics associated with 4th edition made it so the game never actually got a chance. I do understand there's a renaissance of the 4th edition currently, so who knows? Yay, OSR. What do I think of Dungeons & Dragons? Do I think Dungeons & Dragons is the best fantasy game there is? Absolutely not. There are plenty of other systems that do D&D better than D&D. Do I think Pathfinder did D&D better than D&D? At the beginning, yes, but then it became incredibly crunchy and broken, so no, I think in the end the Pathfinder experiment was a failure. Do I think there are other fantasy systems out there that do D&D better than D&D, that even do D20 fantasy better than D&D? Yes, I do. Fantasy Age is not one of them. Fantasy Age is another one that's unbelievably overly complicated for no reason other than being overly complicated. But there are systems that I think do D&D better than D&D. Is D&D 5.0 or the D20 system that is currently owned by Wizards of the Coast the best system to run that type of game? Absolutely. If you're going to play, strength, text, con, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, roll a D20, add stuff, fantasy, there is no better system for running D&D than D&D. But if you run fantasy, if you want to run D20 fantasy, there are definitely games that do fantasy better than D&D. But D&D does D&D better. That's all D&D does. So, and what about other games? Well, I'll often say I think Marvel Superheroes is the single best superhero role-playing game ever, even though the system is and it's very weird. I'll also say that pound for pound, Villains and Vigilantes is almost the perfect role-playing game for superheroes, other than the dexterity, agility thing. And very few people have argued that fact. I think just generally agreed that Villains and Vigilantes, pound for pound, is probably one of the best superhero role-playing games. A lot of people think Marvel Superheroes is one of the best, but there's a lot of people who are different. I'm one of the few people that loves Heroes Unlimited, but most people don't. There's a lot of people who think Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is the worst game ever made. Some people say Blades in the Dark is the best role-playing system ever, and a lot of other people are like, no, it's a horrible system. So I think it just comes down to what is your favorite system, what system best emulates what you want to do, and what systems are you willing to play and not willing to play. Is there a best game? No. Is there a worst game? Well, Swords Path Glory is pretty awful, but and Chimera, the guy didn't even bother to edit the thing and he got it on the market. Again, Fatal is generally considered the worst role-playing game ever made, but again, like I said, there's people who say that if you just take all the other shit out and just pay attention to the actual mechanics, it's actually decent. But still, generally, I think Fatal is the worst role-playing game ever made. But is there a best? And again, I think it's just, what is your favorite system? What system best tells the story you want to tell? Is there a one generic system above all? I think the West End Games D6 system is amazing, and there's very few genres you couldn't do with that, but there's other people who say no. So I think it just all breaks down to personal opinion. I don't know if there is a best game in the world. I think there's just a best game for you at that moment that does what you want it to do. And then maybe, later on you find a different game that's the best game for that moment. I think it's just the moment. I don't know if there is a best system. I'm your grumpy guy to all things gaming. If you appreciate this content, let me know. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. Help me hit 1,000 subs. What do you think is the best role-playing system of all time? Is there a best role-playing system of all time? Comment down below and let me know. Till next time. We have survived August. Congratulations. We've only got 2 more days. Stay warm, stay dry, stay healthy, stay happy, stay awesome, and stay off my land. I'll talk to you later.